Talk to me about when you first became concerned that there could be a problem.
Um, Gosh, I mean, he's had some sort of strange behaviors from grade one, where he was quite hard on himself, and if he got a question wrong, he'd berate himself and tell himself, say, "I'm so stupid," and he would sort of hit himself on the head. And then being a bad loser, that's been quite a big one all the way through. If it doesn't matter what sort of game, how small or how big, if he lost, um, it was like the end of the world. But I think the problems really started around grade two, probably, where he started having some issues on the social side. So schooling, on the academic side, 100%, no issues. But he started having a lot of fights at school, fairly small ones to start with. So he would, if they were playing a game, he would accuse people of cheating if he wasn't winning, and he'd want to change the rules in the middle of the game. And obviously that didn't go well with the others. One of the aftercare teachers came to him and said, "Kaelin, there's something wrong with you." And then the other kids started calling him a nickname, and he'd be walking at school, and it didn't matter who the child was. He didn't even know them sometimes. They would walk past and call him this name. And he didn't tell us about this. He kept very quiet. And it was only at the end of grade four, but when we'd pick him up from aftercare and he'd say, "I hate the school. I don't want to go to school anymore. I hate school." And going from a child who'd originally loved school to this was where we started thinking something's wrong. And that's when we first took him to see a psychologist.
I mean, he used to walk around and he used to know absolutely everyone. He used to know what everybody did, who was related to who. He was just an absolutely social child who could talk to anyone and anyone could talk to him. And he was just one of those social connectors. He knew whose sibling was doing what sport and how well they were doing, and he just knew everything about. It seemed like he knew everything about everyone. That kind of social being to someone who absolutely didn't want anything to do with anyone at school, basically. So it was a massive,
just a
massive
change.
decline.
And that was in grade four. And then grade five was last year, and obviously we had lockdown, and that's when we hit rock bottom with him. The homeschooling obviously is out of routine. To try and get him to do any work at home it actually became unbearable at home as well. And we really hit rock bottom just after the level 5 lockdown started.
And guys, what did you see at home, if I can ask? What did you experience at home on an emotional front? What was going through his mind, do you think? Interaction with yourself, your relationship, the sister. What did you see?
He's always seemed a little immature for his age, his EQ. So his IQ is right up there, but his EQ seemed a couple of years behind. He was quite challenging. He used to challenge us. Everything, brush your teeth was a fight. Have a shower was a fight. And on his side, in last year during the lockdown, he started saying things like, "I hate my life. I wish I'd never been born." So and with his sister, frustrated with her very easily. Small things would set him off. He would get very angry, like unreasonably angry over nothing. And just asking him to do anything, absolutely any work at all, was like we'd asked him to move the world. It was just a fight. It was draining.
How did you try and manage this behavior at home? What did you have to try and do to try and manage it?
I think we tried everything, from being absolutely unrealistically patient,
bribing him, screaming at him,
incentivizing. We tried everything.
Disciplining. all of it, removing his devices. We tried absolutely everything, and reasoning. We sat with reasoning. We'd sit with him and have a discussion and say, Kaelin, do you understand your behavior? And he would agree, and he would absolutely say yes, he understands that it's wrong, and he'll try not to do it again. And sometimes 5 minutes later, he'd be doing it again. It was like we hadn't even had the discussion.
And what did the teacher have to say? Did you have a chance to chat to the teacher before you went to the psychologist? What were the sort of things that came back from the school?
Nothing. That was the funny thing. The only time a teacher said anything to us about his behavior was grade 2, where the teacher said the mat play, where they go and they do a group activity on the mat. Kaelin would bump heads with the other kids because he would quite often, he would take over whatever they were doing, and because he would see the sort of the end game, and he would take over and finish the activity and kind of exclude everyone else. And everyone else would obviously get frustrated and they would undo what he did, and then he would get up and walk away. So that was grade 2. 3 and 4, nothing, absolutely nothing was said to us. Only last year, grade 5, when he went back to school in term 4, was the very first time a teacher said to us, she messaged us and said, I'm very worried about Kaelin. He's withdrawn.
But again, that's after we raised the issues with her.
Yeah.
And only then did she actually really have a look and saw what was going on, what could identify what was going on. It wasn't something that came from...
Wasn't instigated by them, no. So she noticed that the quality of his work had gone downhill, and she said the quality of the work was not what she expected, and he was getting 50% on tests where he'd been getting 80s and 90s, and he wasn't getting on with his peers, and at lunchtimes he was going off by himself. And that was in term 4 last year, for the first time a teacher had raised any concern with us.
And how was his sleeping? Did that change at all?
He's been a great sleeper since he was 5 weeks old. He's slept through, and we've never had a problem with that.
Did you try and put him on any supplements at all, or sort of supplementations that you thought might help?
On and off, I've done a couple of vitamins. I did try rescue at one stage, but no, not really. I didn't really try anything else.
Did you think it helped at all? There was nothing really that helped? No. And then you mentioned you went to see a psychologist. How did you find your way to the psychologist?
So the first time we took him to the psychologist was in grade 4, in the first term, when he had the incident with his friend where he pulled him down. We had made contact with her. I actually think you had recommended her I think it was you, before we started him in grade R, because I wanted to take him for an EQ test to see if he was, because he's also a year younger than his peers. So we took him for a test to see if he would be eligible for grade R. So, sorry. So that's how we made contact with her again. So it was the only psychologist I knew. And we thought we were dealing with a anger management issue. There's an anger streak that runs in the family, and we thought this is what we're dealing with. So we took him to her purely just to counsel him and tell him that what that aftercare teacher had said to him about, there's something wrong with you, Kaelin. We wanted her to explain to him that there wasn't anything wrong with him. It was just a self-control issue and the temper, and just give him some guidance. So that was all we were trying to achieve with her. And so we had 2 or 3 sessions, and she said, he's an amazing child. What a wonderful boy. You've done a great job raising him, very sweet child. Not the picture that we were taking in hand to her, but, she could see the underlying, child that he was. And then we left it throughout grade 4 because we didn't know about the bullying. And then in last year, during the lockdown, when we hit rock bottom, I actually looked up another psychologist on the internet in the area, someone that had done work specifically with anger management. That's what I was looking for. I found a local psychologist, and I took him, I phoned her up and I said, listen, we are desperate now. We actually, it's unmanageable. The situation is at home is out of hand. Hugo is almost avoiding him sometimes because, they butt heads quite badly, and I need to come and see you with Kaelin, and I took him, and she assessed him and said the same thing. He's a wonderful boy, such a sweet child. And I said, sure, but that's not what is happening with him. What is going on with this child? So she did a counseling for a week or two, and then I went back and I said to her, listen, this counseling thing is great, but it's not working. Nothing's changing. I think that Kaelin needs some medicinal help. He needs some help to control. I don't know, but he needs something. So she contacted our GP, and he assessed him, and within 5 minutes he said he needs to go and see a psychiatrist because he does need some medication. And he referred us to a psychiatrist in Westport Hospital. So I Googled the psychiatrist, and there were a lot of bad reviews, and that she seemed to mostly see adults. So I said, well, this is not the one. So I went back to the psychologist, and she said to me, no, there's a psychiatrist that comes in, and she works mostly with children. So I thought, well, great, that's where we're going to go. So we made the appointment, and we had the session. And she went through all the questions and assessed him. And at the end of the session, she said to me, he has ODD, oppositional defiant disorder. Now, I'd obviously been doing some research beforehand, and he ticked all the boxes for ODD. So I thought, okay, great, this is it. But in my research, I had seen something about ADHD. So I asked her, and I said, does he have ADHD as well? And she said to me, no, not at all. And I said, but this whole session, he's been sitting here, he's been fiddling with his mask, and he's been fiddling with his socks. And she said, a child with ADHD would never have sat still through this 30-minute session. He would have been up and running around the room. He definitely doesn't have ADHD. And that's when she put him on the meds for the ODD. 2 weeks in, we increased the dosage because it has kind of taken the edge off a little bit, but the behaviors were all still there. We were still struggling. She increased the dosage again, and then she added another medication for anxiety as well. And she said to me, look, he needs to go for counseling with a psychologist regularly. She will give him the coping mechanisms to get through the issues, and along with the medication, he will basically, within a year, we'll get him off the meds and he'll be fine.
And Hugo, yes, what did you see at that time, if I could ask you as well?
Like the counseling was great. You walked out of counseling after seeing the psychologist. He walked out, he was quite chipper and happy. And that would last for, with the best of intentions. You speak to him about it, and he said, no, he knew exactly what's going on. Yes, she did help him, but an hour and a half later, there'll be another trigger. So, I think that the biggest problem for us, or certainly for me, was every single time there's the optimism, and an hour and a half later, you're just about to hit rock bottom again. So it's an absolute emotional roller coaster. You keep believing every single time, this is going to work, this will help. And she also, the same psychologist, fantastic boy, wonderful personality, all the good stuff that we know, everything we know he is, or he used to be. So yeah, it's the roller coaster ride. It's just up and down. You don't know what is around the corner 30 seconds from now. So
you're almost tiptoeing around your own child because you don't know what's going to trigger him and how he's going to react to something simple.
You know he's not going to become violent towards us, but
aggressive.
Vocally. And yes, you're afraid of the comments about I might as well go and kill myself. so you avoid reprimanding, you avoid disciplining, just to try and keep some peace and quiet.
Yeah, and I mean, I mentioned it to the psychiatrist that sometimes, you know, when we disciplined, he would say, I might as well kill myself. And she said, no, he won't kill himself. Kaelin, will you kill yourself? And Kaelin sort of quite shocked, and he said, no. And she said, oh, he's fine, he won't do it. So just, you know, just discipline him. But, you know, as a parent, you know, even if there's a 1% chance, you're not going to take that chance. There's no ways. I mean, and if this is what my 10-year-old is saying, when the teen years hit and the hormones hit, how is he going to be feeling then if this is how he is already at 10? I struggled with that with the psychiatrist, I must admit. I wasn't comfortable with that, and I wasn't comfortable with her, even though I must say I've never thought that Kaelin had ADHD, because there's a perception for ADHD that the child is hyperactive.
Definitely a stigma.
Which is, I mean, Kaelin is not hyperactive and never has been. There's a perception that they don't perform well at school because they don't have the attention span. Kaelin has been a top performer. He came 5th in grade 4, even despite that terrible year that he had. He still came 5th in the grade. So for me, I mean, I don't think either one of us ever thought ADHD, but the answer that the psychiatrist gave me to my question when I said, does he have ADHD? The answer didn't sit right. So the fact that he wasn't up and running around the room as an answer to that isn't my child. So that for me was not a good answer. So I was uncertain.
It was a very stereotypical response, even from her. Just to put
make
that
a diagnosis and move on, kind of
just because
thing.
It's not jumping around.
Yeah.
Did you find that the psychiatrist went to things in a lot of depth, gathered information from teachers, tried to get a lot of information based on what had happened at school, that type of thing?
We did fill out a form. We got the teacher to fill out a form. She did read through that. And then she mostly asked Kaelin the questions, asked me a few questions, but mostly had a conversation with Kaelin and based her diagnosis on that and what she saw sitting in front of her when he was there. Yeah.
I find that if I had to base my diagnosis on every child that I saw, well, I would get it wrong 80% of the time, because, you know, for a child who comes into my room, sometimes they might be overly stimulated and you might think that they're hyperactive and they're not, or they might be intimidated and scared and sit there and not do anything. And so it's not something that is always typical of what you see in your consultation room, because what happens in your home and in that classroom and with his friends is very different, and none of us are really there. What was the next step? You obviously had a bit of a niggle in the back of your mind, and what was the next step in your mind that you thought you had to do?
Well, we weren't seeing much of a change. The meds, and I mean, he was on some heavy duty meds. It kind of took the edge off, but slightly. So everything was still there. He was still upset. He was still unhappy. My child was unhappy, Dr. Flett. It was horrible. And it so happened in January this year. I'm hardly ever on Facebook, and I jumped on Facebook, and someone had posted a link to your blog that you've started. And I signed up. I thought, well, let's follow it. And it was a week later that you posted that video about ODD. I saw it pop up and I thought, well, let me read it, see if you've got any further information that I can use to help me with my child. And I watched the 12-minute video. And in there, you mentioned a stat around the fact that I think it's 30 to 50% of children with ADHD have ODD. So ODD is almost like a side effect, a secondary thing to ADHD. And I watched the video and I went straight away to Hugo and I said, look, we got to make an appointment with Dr. Flett because I want a second opinion. He's on these serious meds. We're not progressing and my child is unhappy, and we're going back to school in a week or two's time, and he is dreading it, and I don't know what to do for him. So we need to make that appointment, and then I did.
What was I remember the day, actually, I think that you came in. And then, of course, because of the COVID restrictions, Hugo was a remote visitor in my room. And what was your sort of, what did you sort of feel at the end of it? Did it make sense to you, or was it a little bit more of a little bit more confusion?
Yeah, I would say things actually simplified. Made more sense, and it was, the diagnosis was certainly less concerning than
Yeah.
I'm happy with ADHD as opposed to ODD.
Yeah, I think
it just made more sense. So, and at least there was something we could do apart from talking.
I think the questionnaire that we filled in for you was an eye-opener to start with. We sat and did it together, and there were something like 54 questions, I think it was, something like that. And, you know, Hugo and I did it together, and we might have been one number out on some of the questions, but we pretty much agreed on most of them. And then you said to us the first 9 questions were to do with ADHD, I think it was, and, you know, Kaelin ranked high on all of them. And when you said that, I think it was a bit of a shock, because I don't know, I still wasn't really thinking ADHD. I don't know what I was thinking, but I just knew, you know, what he was doing wasn't working. But when you explained it, and all the behaviors and the way that you explained it to Kaelin as well, was clarifying, I think is the word. It was like, there might be some light here for us. Still a little bit, I won't say skeptical, but, you know, we'd been through this road with all these other people, and I was kind of like, let me try the meds and see what happens. And day one, within 2 hours, Kaelin had his sense of humor back. And I mean, I haven't seen that for 3 years in him.
Yeah.
He was laughing, he was joking, I mean, that was day one. And I think my heart lifted a little bit. I thought, this is it. We've actually found it. I can't believe it.
I just want to jump back, you know, a couple of days or weeks before that even, or probably months, because what ended up happening was that he would lose his temper, or something would set him off. And while the ODD diagnosis was there, you know, he spoke to him about it, but at some point, the ODD became an excuse. Something would happen, and we would talk to him about it, and he would simply turn around and say, well, I have a medical condition. This is my excuse for doing what I'm doing. So I think this ODD, also with the psychiatrist and a psychologist, it's as though it nearly got shoved down his throat that, yes, you have a problem. The coping mechanisms that they were going to put in place was not working, and the diagnosis started becoming an excuse for behavior. So, you know, that ended up being a fallback for him. If something happened, oh, I have this condition, so, you know, that's my excuse for my behavior.
That's a good point. And he hasn't done that with the ADHD,
no.
not once.
So to jump forward again to where we are now, as Juanita said, it was, we 95% of the time, we have our son back, the child that he used to be.
Yeah.
He's mature, the way he talks about things, and he takes an interest in people. He starts talking to everyone again.
He's enjoying life. He's
Yeah.
enjoying his sport.
We have not had a single problem getting him up for school in the mornings.
No.
He's taking responsibility.
Mm.
So it's absolutely day and night. It's an absolute 180 from where he was.
Has he said anything directly to you the way he feels? Because your boy Kaelin is a highly intelligent boy. And I think a lot of his symptoms that he's had over the years, he's been able to mask because of his intelligence. You know, he's been able to keep up because of his intelligence. Has he said anything to you the way he feels since he's been on the medicine?
No, he hasn't. Just if I say, how do you feel? He says good. He's not very vocal on the emotional side. He just says good. Yeah.
And his routine in the morning, just his energy. You mentioned to me, I think the last time we met, as you said, it's almost as though he reminds you of the boy he was, say, 2-3 years ago.
Mm.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah, no, he gets up in the morning, he does what he needs to do.
Yeah.
He gets ready for school.
Takes his pills before his feet hit the ground, like you told him to, because he's very law-abiding. He brushes his teeth, gets dressed, gets his kit packed. No problems there, nothing.
And have you had any worries on the medication at all? No, because obviously we're in a process now of weaning him off those other strong medications.
Nothing. We had no side effects. Nothing. He's been hundreds.
How far have we got now with weaning off the medications?
We're down to, he was on 2.5 of the one tablet. He's down to half on that one, and he's still on the anti-anxiety. He's still on his half a tablet a day. So we're probably 2/3 the way, maybe a bit further on weaning him off now.
Good.
Yep.
And from your side, this perception that ADHD, you have to be a hyperactive, a hyperkinetic, moving individual that is frenetic, or somebody who is kind of almost like on another planet in a sort of a daydreaming, like a brain fog, out there. And, just those sort of stereotypes. And just to sort of kind of, I suppose, emphasize the fact that, ADHD, the name ADHD, it says I've got a bit of attention, I'm a bit busy. It belittles the diagnosis. It belittles the severity of the problem. It's like saying somebody who has autism, they talk a bit funny and they flap their hands. That's all they do. When it's a very serious condition if you have something like autism. So, I think that the impulsivity of emotional control, that is what Kaelin has challenges with. He has that difficulty in controlling, they say it's the mind's heart, that ability to kind of just quell that anger sometimes that he feels when he is under stress and he's distracted. Can I ask just finally, what are your concerns with the medicine? Have you seen any worries that you would like to talk about with the medication and side effects?
I haven't really seen anything. I mean, when you first put him on the new con, I researched it, and I did see someone said something, it's like the cocaine of whatever they said it was, and I thought, and I said that to you, and he was like, what, cocaine? And I said, well, no, it's not cocaine, but it's, I think along that schedule of drugs. But I think Dr. Flett, that you understand the medication. I think that you're giving him the right dose. So I'm not concerned that you're going to overdose him. You're keen to get him off the other meds, which I'm very happy about. Side effects, I mean, he's got a sinus infection at the moment. I did see that is one of the side effects, sinuses, and he can be a sinus.
What one factor I think, and that I think is sometimes just to sort of, dispel the myths when they do a study on a medication, so they trial it, they have to report every single symptom while you're on a medication. So if you had a toothache, they'd have to put toothache down. If you had a rash, they'd have to put rash down. If you had your hair went a bit grey, they'd put grey hair. They'd have a toenail that fell off, and a toenail that fell off. So it doesn't cause side effects of sinusitis, by the way. So maybe so that it doesn't do that at all. It's just that when they so the other thing is, it's not related to any cocaine, but you know, that's the myth. It's a stimulant medication. It can be abused. Concerta or Nucon or Contramol, you can't, because it's a long-acting preparation. The only one that can be abused is Ritalin. If you crush it up and you snort it or inject it into your vein quickly, you'd get a high in 30 seconds. That's the only way you can do that. So, you know, just I suppose, you know, it's such a learning curve for all these things. There's so much to know, you know, and what I'm very happy with is, you know, when you see a chemical imbalance with a problem like ADHD, it is such a well-documented, researched problem. And when you see a reaction in 2 hours, that's amazing. You know, that really is amazing. Yeah. And any other sort of concerns that you might think about with the medication and things that you might think about? Is there any other concern that you have?
I think eating.
Yeah,
we'll let you off at school.
The eating is still a problem. He's still eating a huge amount. I hoped that with the reduction of the Zoxidone that we would have seen less of that, but he seems to be actually eating more. So that's a bit odd. But I don't know. We'll see when he's off it completely if it makes a difference. I'm hoping.
And then also the anti-anxiety medicine can also lead to eating. Yeah.
Okay.
But I think with Kaelin as well, he also has that impulsivity, doesn't he? You know, he has that impulsivity, which is part of his nature, I think. And you know, once he starts to feel better about himself, does some sport, more active, you know, we can hopefully see a reduction there. But anything else you'd like to add? I've taken up enough of your time, and I'm sorry about that this evening.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing, Dr. Fletters. You know, the thing for me is that, you know, if your child has got a broken leg, you know, you don't wait a week or a month to take them to the hospital. And if you get to the hospital, they don't say, we're going to call the cardiologist to come and operate on the leg. You know, you need the orthopedic surgeon. So there's definitely a stigma attached to mental ailments or mental illnesses, if you will. And we're guilty of it as well. We kind of saw there was an issue a few years back, and we dithered over, do we take him, what do we do? Let's try a bit of rescue, let's try a bit of this. And, you know, I regret it. We should have had him at the right person back then. But, you know, we also thought it was maybe just an anger issue. And, you know, just an assessment would have told us. I mean, it hurts no one to do an assessment, and we should have probably have done it a couple of years back. And the other part is, you know, like I said about the cardiologist operating on the leg, you know, yes, someone referred us to a psychiatrist that works with children, but they aren't a child psychiatrist. And that's another regret of mine, is that, you know, we should have had a child psychiatrist. I don't know if there are any in Durban. I've got no idea. But I mean, we ended up with you, and that's, you know, the great thing, thankfully. So, you know, my advice is if you think that there's any issue, is check it out. Just have an assessment done. If there's nothing, you know, great, move on. If there is, catch it early. Start treating it before their self-confidence erodes. It erodes very quickly, and it can do a lot of damage. And, you know, get the right person in to look at your child and help them.
Right. Yeah, I think also when the issues started, as you said, it's stress, it's anxiety.
Yeah.
Those are not the typical thought of symptoms of ADHD.
Yeah.
So
you doubt yourself. You doubt.
There's just no ways we would have ended up even thinking that it's ADHD.
No. He's not atypical in what we think of as an ADHD. I mean, there it is in the name, hyperactive. It's in the name, ADHD, hyperactive. He's not. So that's why, you know, we never for 1 second, but that's why I go and do an assessment with the right person and, you know, get to the bottom of it.